Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Handson Mlotshwa. He is the Director of ICT Programs at Matthew Goniwe School of Leadership and Governance. So, Mr. Mlotshwa, thank you so much, sir. You can start.
Good morning. I think it's still morning to everybody. As I've already been introduced, I come from an institute called the Matthew Goniwe School of Leadership and Governance. We are a provincial teacher development institute for the Gauteng Education Department. Matthew Goniwe's role basically involves training different education stakeholders. We have two different branches that have got 4 different units that focus on upskilling these different stakeholders. The first unit that we have is the teacher development unit, whose focus mainly is to capacitate educators within the province from a content perspective as well as the pedagogy and assessment which is involved in teaching and learning. We've also got the ICT unit, which also falls under the teacher development branch, whose role basically is to capacitate educators on the use of ICT tools, features, and also resources that the department provides to different schools. We've also got 2 other branches that focus on governance and also on leadership. The governance focuses on the training of parents, RCLs, which is your Learner Representative Council, and also the training of school, the SGPs, the school governing bodies. We've also got a leadership branch whose main area of focus is basically to upskill your school management teams. But over and above that, we also offer psychosocial programs to different stakeholders. We also have an ECD unit that focuses on the training of early childhood development practitioners, both at a qualification level and also at a upskilling point of view. But in terms of my presentation today, colleagues, I would want to focus mainly on the ICT strategy of the Matthew Goniwe School of Leadership and Governance and how we are influencing policy as well as practice within the department, and also in terms of the implementation of the different programs that we have. All right, I think anything that we are meant to discuss around education has to be discussed within the context that we currently have, which is the COVID-19. The challenge that COVID-19 has actually brought into the system, basically has to do with changes in terms of the processes that we are already used to, changes also in terms of our practices from a professional development point of view, and also in terms of how teachers have to actually roll out the curriculum within the classroom as well as out of school, bearing in mind that the current restrictions have also given liberty to different people that have got comorbidities to be able to either work from home, that will be your teachers, and also your learners. So what this has actually done, it has got us to rethink and look at, I think, the policy direction. Because one of the things that I think is crucial in terms of how we basically operate as Matthew Goniwe is that we also look at the macro perspective in terms of the policy priorities of the country. I think the first speaker mentioned the importance of employment. And in this particular case, we are saying any programs that we develop from an education point of view has to answer a critical question, which is around infrastructure development, because anything that we get to do has to do with infrastructure. The same way that COVID has actually affected different public schools, which are affected mostly with overcrowding. So in this particular case, we're asking ourselves, since this particular program was introduced in 2008 through Gauteng Online, it later on evolved to the schools of the future, which the MEC talks of the paperless classrooms. So we also need to have that particular understanding as to where this particular ICT within our education system in Gauteng is actually coming from. Just to give you a brief background, it is just to say that from a policy point of view, in 2003, around about 2004, an e-white paper was actually produced, which basically influenced how we get to interpret the use of ICTs for teaching and learning. So the importance of this particular paper, one also needs to have an understanding of where it's actually originated from. So the paper basically was drafted as a collaboration between the Department of Communications as well as the Department of Basic Education. So communications went on to roll out what we call the Gauteng Broadband Network, which basically seeks to connect different communities to different internet resources. So when you look at from that particular policy perspective, I'll go back to the infrastructure question, where we are saying, how do you make education, how do we get to close the gaps that we have within our curriculum in terms of addressing issues of the world of work, also within the curriculum, and the new technological skills that our learners basically need to learn. So when you look at the policy imperatives that influence, that inform our training programs from an instructional design point of view, we go back to the National Development Plan, where the province managed to get what you call the TMR, which is your transformation, modernization, and reindustrialization. So it is these concepts that flow across, I think, in most of our programs that we develop, and also being influenced by the ICT strategy from the Department of Basic Education. But also to go beyond what I'm just saying, you realize that as a provincial teacher development institute, I think in terms of our programs, we have got two main focus areas, which is your initial teacher education, where we've got orientation programs for particularly graduate teachers, but our main focus basically is on your in-service teachers. So in terms of this particular strategy, I'll go back to that question which I asked with regards to infrastructure. When policy planning is done within the province, I think one central question that is obvious, that is always asked is, should we take jobs to the people or people to jobs? Which is an infrastructure, which is a central infrastructure question with big e-learning connotations. So from an e-learning point of view, I think in 2013, when the MEC Panyaza Lusufi announced the promulgation of the schools of the future, one of the things I think that we went with was to look at the rollout of devices, because we cannot talk about e-learning or ICTs in schools without having the necessary ICT infrastructure. So we've got a project management metrics team that basically looks at these different enablers. I'll call them enablers. We've got streams that focus on device allocation, streams that focus on connectivity. We've got a stream that focuses on e-learning, that is the development of the e-learning content. Then we've got a teacher development unit where I belong within the Matthew Goniwe, where our job is basically to capacitate teachers so that these particular devices that are rolled out do not just become white elephants within the schools. So this is what basically informs our training programs as an institution. But in terms of what has the case for ICTs within the Gauteng schools, I think there are three main root problems that we identified from the different studies. The first one being the improvement of quality teaching within our schools. So in the international studies, your PELS and the SACMEC, they identified that we've got poor learner performance, I think, in certain subjects. And one of the things that we tried to do was to introduce ICTs so that they can become an enabler in the delivery of the curriculum, and also to assist teaching and learning from an assessment point of view. So when you look at this particular program, it is very targeted and specific in the sense that we've got 3 different people that are focused within this particular project, which is your teacher. We've also got the learner, and we've also got the classroom as an organization space where education basically takes place. So within some of our classes, I can say about 511 schools within the province have been endowed with ICT resources in the form of smart boards. And certain learners have been given tablets so that they are able to access digital content or multimedia content for the purpose of teaching and learning. But with the teacher, we have given a teacher a laptop which they can use to connect to these different resources so that they are able to deliver the curriculum. Then we also looked at how technology can impact on the establishment. When I'm talking about the establishment, I'm looking at it from an institutional point of view, where we are saying, how do you assist your curriculum delivery units to better manage the curriculum within the school, as well as from an administrative level. So the focus there is basically on the use of data for decision making. So when you're looking at data-driven decision making, the department has basically adopted platforms that enable us to basically collect data from schools, data that is specific to teacher attendance, and as to how teachers also cover the curriculum and how they get to do their school-based assessment, as well as your final term exams. So that data we are able to collect through the DDD programs, which is the data-driven districts, and the use of SASEMs. Then the focus basically of all this, which I'm talking about, it has to do with how we look at the instructional intervention, which is a teacher development intervention plan, where we are looking at how can we best utilize ICTs to improve learner engagement in the process of teaching and learning. And because I think one of the things that we need to also understand as education practitioners is that when you look at learning itself, it is defined in the realm of psychology, because all definitions that have to do with learning are found within psychology. When you look at the space with which we organize and learning take place, it is the curriculum in effect, because this is where you organize the different learning events. And we are looking at the role of ICTs in terms of facilitating or improving the learning experience of different learners within our schools. Okay, then in terms of, because we needed to adopt a model for implementing ICTs within the province. And one way to do that was to look at the different models that are used by different countries in the world. If you look at the slide to my far right, I've got minimal tech, which is basically practiced in India in most primary schools. Then we've also got what we call the tech-enabled approach, which became one of those approaches that we adopted in terms of implementing ICTs in schools. Then we've got the blended learning, which is our aspirant model. And then we've got what we call radical transformation, which Apple tried to do in the United States, the Apple program, where they were rolling out digital resources to specific schools so that they could achieve what we call paperless classrooms. But so that we could find meaning in terms of what we were doing, we focused on 6 different components or criteria to determine which approach we needed to go with. So in terms of this particular approach, it focused on the in-classroom intervention, where you are looking at the teaching style. How can ICTs improve basically the teaching or the interaction that takes place in the classroom? So I know that the previous speaker touched on the different features that one can utilize, but pedagogy for active learning should basically focus on the engagement or interaction that basically takes place in a classroom. For example, for meaningful learning to take place, there should be what we call learner to content engagement. There should also be learner-to-learner engagement, which speaks to collaboration. There should be learner-to-content engagement. For example, you've got the slides which are here, which I'm also utilizing to articulate the knowledge that we have actually put there, which is the content. But we are also saying, how can you leverage on ICT to basically scaffold or have a different way of actually presenting your information? Then we're looking at ICT as a medium of teaching. During this COVID period, I think one can appreciate that since we've got teachers and learners with comorbidities that are at home, so when you look at the current school setup, there are three ways in which an individual can access basic education within South Africa. The first one being your public schooling, the second one being your independent schooling, the third one being homeschooling. But currently, because homeschooling is defined with a different policy legislation, the current learners that we have that are at home, we've defined that as lockdown learning, which is different from what you would call homeschooling. So what it simply means is our teachers do not necessarily have to focus on the in-classroom practice. But now we're asking ourselves a question to say, how can they also do what we call out-of-school support for those particular learners that are at home? So that's where ICTs come in, and we are looking at them as a medium of teaching. How can you do that synchronous or asynchronous, remote or online learning from specific schools? Then we are also looking at the configuration of the classroom. So we focused on the configuration based on the 4 models that we have been given. So the configuration speaks to the layout of the classroom, how these particular resources have to be organized so that you can influence effective learning within these particular schools. Then we looked at the subject which is being taught, because ICTs respond differently to different subject matter. Certain subjects are closed, are difficult to adapt on the online platforms or utilizing different digital tools, while certain subjects are a bit more open. So we also looked at that, and we looked at that from those different approaches that we have just given you. So we also looked at the mix of learners, because for learning to take place, learning at times is situational. So you need to also have an understanding of the background of these different learners that are receiving this particular instruction, either from online platforms or through the use of ICT resources within a particular classroom. Then we also looked at the different activities that can actually be done online in order to deliver the curriculum. So I've already spoken on these different enablers, which is the training of our pre-service and in-service teachers in terms of e-literacy, so that they are able to utilize different productivity tools for the purpose of teaching and learning. We are also looking at e-content from an investment point of view, which has to do with the development of new content. But we all know that different teachers are not necessarily instructional designers or content developers. What teachers do, they adapt what they have been given. So that's the importance of that particular e-learning stream. Then the devices create an environment that enables us to effectively utilize ICTs for the purpose of teaching and learning within schools. The connectivity network, I spoke about the Gauteng broadband network, which has basically identified schools within the township where internet access is basically being given for the purpose of teaching and learning. Then we are looking at the use of data in order to drive curriculum decision-making, and so that data can also be used to drive learning within the classroom so that teacher practices are improved as well as the learner performance at the same time. So we're also looking at infrastructure. That means before we actually deploy these particular ICT resources, I'm sure those who have come in here, you would have seen the smart boards that are outside on shore there. This is what we have actually put in some of those township schools. But we've also got maintenance and support through the Harry Gwala program, where we've employed IT graduates from previously disadvantaged communities to provide technical support into different schools. So this is the metrics that we basically utilized now. So where we took the classroom configuration component, put it against a specific model to determine which of the approaches would be best for utilization in the different schools. So out of what you see, we were also looking at how feasible or scalable an approach is. If you look at your radical transformation, given our state as a developing country, as well as limited resources, we couldn't go with the radical transformation, which would have entailed that we need to basically give ICT resources to all stakeholders. That's not really feasible, I think, under the current context. But what we have done is to utilize a phased-in approach, utilizing the tech-enabled learning experience, learning approach, which we also believe increases learner engagement within the process of teaching and learning, because you are saying these ICT tools have been deployed into the classroom. And the question is, how does a teacher basically utilize those particular resources to mediate the curriculum? So then the other approach that we decided to go with, but what COVID has done, I think the good thing about COVID is that it has basically accelerated the need for us to push even harder this particular e-learning through the blended programs that we are trying to introduce. We are on the verge of basically training our teachers on the use of different platforms. Currently, they are participating in our Matthew Goniwe online courses, where they are experiencing online courses as students. But the goal is basically to transform that so that at some point they're able to instruct on the online platforms. Then this is basically an explanation in terms of the approaches and how they basically affect our different stakeholders, from the teacher, the learner, and the establishment. With the establishment, we are looking at your head office and as well as district office responsible for curriculum delivery. Now, as a province, we adapted, like I showed you, I think in the first diagram, where we said we have read through the DBE strategy. Remember, planning takes place in 3 levels: at a macro level, meso level, as well as a micro level. So when you look at this particular diagram, this is an integration framework for ICTs at an instructional point of view, as well as also at the development of materials that we do for our e-learning programs. So what this particular framework enables us to do, it enables us to focus on the important components that are required for teaching and learning within the classroom. So this COPAF model, it was developed by Matthew Goniwe, adapted from the TPEC model. So we decided to adapt this so that it can address the current challenges that we have within our education system. So this particular framework begins below with what we call change management. We believe that for teachers to be able to adapt ICTs, we need to offer them change management courses within curriculum so that they're able to utilize ICTs for content perspective. Remember, with content, you are looking at the conceptual use of knowledge. You're also looking at the use of what we call procedural knowledge. We are also looking at how teachers can develop ideas from specific content. Then from a pedagogic level, the focus is on how can we develop active engagement, whether in school or out of school. That is why I spoke about the different interactions that should be taking place within the classroom. The teacher to learner interaction, the learner to content interaction, and the learner to teacher interaction. They are important, as well as even if you are to look at it from an online point of view, where you are saying that material has to be developed in such a way that it guides individualized learning pathways. Then we also looked at the assessment component from various angles to say, how can assessment be used, particularly formative assessment, to drive learning engagement within the classroom? So from an assessment point of view, our focus is on the different tools that can be used to assess learners. I'm glad that the previous speaker talked about, I think, TORs within online. And in our case, we have trained, I think previously, our teachers on the use of web quests. We've trained them on the use of cyberhands, which are some of those online activities that learners can actually engage. We understand that the context within Gauteng is varied, and it might take a bit of a while before we are able to transform the practices of our teachers. Then when we speak of our full ICT integration, we are saying when a teacher reaches that particular level, because our model is also behavioral, we are saying the teacher should be able to transform his own practice. So these are basically levels of, because when you come up with a model, one also has to come up with some sort of competency framework. And this is more or less of our learning journey that our teachers are taking currently within the province. So in the previous 5 years, in the 5th administration, the focus has been on technological skills or digital affordances, because we've just rolled out these devices. Most of our teachers have foundational knowledge on the use of ICTs. So at this particular level, our training was more device oriented, but we are now in the 6th administration. The focus is now on integration. We are looking at how our teachers can go through this content phase, because we are saying some of them, or a greater number of them in the schools that we have rolled out these particular resources, should be digitally fluent. We are also looking at the methodological phase or digital pedagogies to say once our teachers are fluent, they should have purposeful use of ICTs with regards to teaching and learning. So this is the blended platform that we're currently utilizing as an institution. It's called the Matthew Goniwe Online. Currently, we are expanding our program offering to include other units. So previously, this platform had been designed for ICT programs, but we have expanded it so that we include different stakeholders like your governance, leadership, ECD. So those particular programs, some of them are currently being developed so that teachers have access to them on the platform for the purpose of them having these flexible and individualized learning pathways. Then I wanted to speak about, I think, something that has come up, which the world is talking about when people talk of 4IR, which is the coding and robotics. But we are looking at this particular content or component of education as part and parcel of the pedagogy that teachers should be using. So we've interpreted the coding and robotics within the project-based learning component. And we are saying the coding aspect is used, so learners with the use of PBL, we are saying our learners should first identify a problem, then they will use the coding now to basically respond to the problems in their communities. It could be in geography, it could be in technology, or it could be in other different subjects. But the robotics now becomes the final product that these particular learners should have developed. So when you look at the development of this particular program or skills focus, it is based on 2 subjects that the DBE will be introducing. I think they have started with a pilot this year, which is your digital literacy. That's grade R to grade 9. Then from grade 10 to 12, we speak of it as digital technologies. So we adapted that particular curriculum, identified skills that we thought teachers can utilize in the different phases. So between grade R and 3, our focus is basically on computational thinking, where they do pattern recognition. That's in numeracy. And the whole point basically is for them to explore coding and do block building. Then as they get to grade 4 to 6, we're still focusing on block building, but we're making these particular learners aware of the different interactions with devices. So the skills are basically problem solving, pattern recognition, as well as computational thinking. So grade 7 to 9, the focus is on making these people mini experts, but now we're introducing them to interactive stories and games for the purpose of learning, and also as well as solving problems within their different communities. Then the last one, which is grade 10 to 12, we are trying to create expert coders and people who can actually develop robots for the purpose of teaching and learning. So it's interesting that we have adopted this because our focus when we develop programs is on the priorities that we are usually given by the provincial government to say, how do we infuse some of these needs that the community would have come up with in addressing the community needs through entrepreneurial skills, which I've not included in this particular presentation. I would have gone further to look at the instructional use of ICTs, but because we're limited for time and to also allow for questions to come in, I would end here. Thank you.